Hi, I'm Pearl, and today I am talking about cultural appropriation. Wow, big words. I guess we're all hearing a lot of new terms at the moment, whether it's to do with coronavirus or it's to do with Black Lives Matter, it's to do with confronting racism, and a million other things that are going on in the world today. Including things like elections and stuff like that, and what's going on with government, and how things work. Because a lot of times it's only when things go really badly wrong that we know how things work and what's going on. But this term cultural appropriation is one that's come up for me in really the last week or so, and I really wanted to talk directly to that. One of the things that you may or may not know about me is that I am passionate about what I would call Indigenous healing. And so for like pretty much the last 10 years, ever since I had, and actually longer than that, I started researching and learning and trying all kinds of different types of healing. So things like massages, things like Reiki, and even things like firewalking, stuff like that, all around the world. And so I think just over a year ago, I published what was the 7th edition of my book on different types of healing, and it had about 500 different types of healing in it. And so, yeah, I've been around the world having massages, terribly hard work, yeah. But also, I've done quite a lot of research into what I would call like the living culture of healing and Indigenous healing. Because for me, one of the things is that I come from England, and really growing up, I grew up in a very mainstream culture, very BBC, BBC One, bit of Channel 4 in there sometimes, but in a very mainstream culture. And that meant that I was in denial about a lot of things about myself and about the world. And in England, we have a kind of lack, or we have had for a very long time, a lack of understanding of traditional wisdom and Indigenous healing, Indigenous wisdom, those kind of things. And what I would comfortably call shamanism now, having studied it and having practiced with wise shaman from around the world, with wise men and wise women from around the world. And there are many things that I now understand and I'm quite relaxed about. And I understand that a lot of things that I thought were problems and things that were wrong with me are actually very natural gifts. And when I sold my house and went travelling that year, I was in such crisis because I was so conflicted between the culture in which I'd been raised and what I was beginning to understand and learn about. And what I loved was going to other cultures, for example, like Japan, and understanding a little bit about the Shinto faith and understanding how nature was respected in that and how nature was perceived as a living thing. And even just from spending a very little time in Japan, I was waking up to aspects of myself and understanding how I could, and it sounds weird, but talk to nature and listen to nature. And nowadays, if I hear things, I read something the other day, which was, when you're in nature, just listen, and the answers will come. And it's so true, it's so true that I've learned to kind of listen. I would say listen to the wind and listen to the trees, and I've learned to hug trees and kind of absorb natural wisdom and knowledge, even in terms of understanding the way that birds are. And I'm comfortable I'm much more comfortable talking about this now, 4 years on, than I was 4 years ago, because honestly, 4 years ago, I felt like if I talked about these things, somebody was going to lock me up, and somebody was going to say I was crazy. And it's really sad, because actually in my studying, I've discovered that, that is the kind of thing that happened to people within the last, 50 years. Not that long ago, people were locked up and subjected to psychological treatments because they were talking about things like spirit animals, because they were talking about things like intuition and knowing things intuitively. And one of the things that happened was, when I went off on a travel around the world, so many times I ended up in the right place at the right time, and that was all down to intuition and just trusting my heart, trusting my gut. And I've been very blessed to find teachers from around the world who are very open about what they're teaching, and it's such a beautiful thing, and it's so wonderful to be embraced into a culture like that, where people say, yes, it's okay, this is normal, we don't think you're crazy. And I particularly remember going to Sri Lanka, and I loved going there, and people would have a sacred rock, or that they would touch the rock and feel better, and I just thought, oh, that's great, because I understand that seems normal to me. Whereas in England, we don't even respect the trees. We would cut down an ancient tree without, or a lot of people would, and then there's a lack of respect for nature and for natural things. And, it does hurt. It hurts to have spent so long in denial about, so many things that are so natural, and to think there's something wrong with me and something wrong with what I think. And I remember a few years ago, I was talking to a young girl, and we just bumped into each other accidentally, and we started chatting, and one of the things she said was that she'd had the experience of all these crows following her. And she was really freaked out, and she was like, oh, I suppose I better go and become like a Wiccan, or and I was like, no, that's not what it means. That's not what it means. It's just, it's something that in nature, crows come around you very often, and it's a sort of sign of protection. So and sometimes they're kind of giving you a warning, and it's a little bit like that thing, about magpies, one for sorrow, two for joy. And very often when I see certain animals, I think, okay, be careful now, this is a sign. Before we get too carried away with that, I also know from studying shamanism that we mustn't get caught up in the signs too much. They're to help us. But a lot of the things that I wasn't very comfortable with, that sort of were drifting around in places, I also have learnt through studying with proper shaman that there's a reason why I wasn't comfortable with them. Things like tarot cards, and anything that sort of, purports to tell the future. And as like they say, you shouldn't be using those things regularly. They're kind of it's not helpful. Because really what we need to be doing is learning to listen to and trust our intuition. So we don't need those kind of tools. And if we start to use them a lot and rely upon them, they can get in our way, get in the way of a true practice. And the true practice is really listening, and that's all it is. It's so simple. It's just listening, but it's become something that people became very scared of, because trying to use some examples is, when you kind of have a feeling about someone in your family, and you know that something's going wrong for them, and you have to be there for them. Or I don't know if you've ever experienced like empathy with somebody, where you've experienced a feeling, and it is a friend or a family member or a colleague, that you felt something that they feel. emotionally or in terms of pain. And we understand now a lot of people will talk about that as being empathic. And it's actually much more common than you think. And there's a lot of people that say that really anyone can learn this, anyone can be trained to do this, because it's just really about deep listening. And there are other things as well that I've learned and I understand, and it's less scary now. That there were times when I used to feel things very deeply, and I used to get really good vibes about some people, get really bad vibes about other people, and I used to judge that. I used to think, oh, I have to be nice to everybody, and just because I get the heebie-jeebies around someone, I should be nice to them. And I've learned that now I don't have to be. If I get the heebie-jeebies, I got to run for it. It's fine, and to trust that intuition and trust the way that I feel about things and about people and about the weather and about work and all those kind of things. And so really one of the things that sparked this conversation that I'm having with you about cultural appropriation. Now, this was something that I disagreed with quite strongly, and I think you can see where I'm coming from with this. I was reading something and somebody was saying it was like, if you're not from a Native American tribe, you shouldn't be talking about spirit animals. And I really disagree with that, with due respect, because the concept of spirit animals is in a lot of cultures around the world. It's not something that's unique to one culture. And the things that are true, the things that come from nature and natural wisdom, like herbal remedies and all things like that, are often practiced around the world in different cultures, either because they are just true, and the truth belongs to all of us, or because they come from a shared ancestry, a culture from Africa. And I have been to Maripeng, I have been to the Cradle of Life, and I have felt, the that feeling of coming home to that place. So I think the thing is, there's a lot going on at the moment, and I think we have to be very careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I hope you know what I mean by that. What I mean is, huge change is necessary, yes. But we have to be wise and sensible about what we listen to and where we get it from. And right now I suddenly realise, actually just in saying this, that many of the people that I'm listening to and seeing on social media and around, to use the word something, who are they? Why am I listening to this person? And so I think there's a definite need and awareness and a choice from many of us to start listening more to people who know better and know more than we do. But when we do that, we also have to, it's kind of weird, because to get out of discrimination or prejudice, we still need to discriminate in terms of who we listen to. We still need to check our sources. We still need to, for example, say if I'm reading the newspapers to understand about coronavirus, I still need to question the legitimacy of that newspaper, that reporter, those facts. Same thing with social media. I still need to question, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult sometimes to know what the truth is. And I always say for that, the best thing is to listen to your heart, to really listen deeply. Because when you listen deeply, and I'll tell you this, a great teacher said to me before, they said, the only battle is the battle between truth and lies. But the problem is we're so good at lying to ourselves that it's very easy for other people to lie to us. So once we stop lying to ourselves and stop believing our own lies, then it's much, much harder for other people to lie to us, even if they believe it's true. So somebody could be lying to you, but it's something that someone's told them and they think it's true. And so we when we kind of engage with that deep wisdom and that natural wisdom, we know what's rubbish and what's not, you know? And that's what I love, is I couldn't go around the world and practice with Buddhist masters and shaman and all that kind of thing, and become enlightened and understand wisdom around the world, and then have and then believe that racism is correct, you know, because I've learnt too much. I've seen too much truth. I've seen too much wisdom to believe in such a lie, such a you know, a damaging lie, you know. But I wanted to really talk about this because I don't want anybody out there, and I've taught this and I've written these books about natural wisdom, because we need it, you know, especially we need it in England, we need it in Europe. And here's a very, very sad story, and I don't, you know, it's not something I really research very much, but I know, and I think most people in Europe know, that we've suffered a lot 16th, 17th and 18th centuries, where so many wise men and women were murdered for being witches, you know. And I was doing a little research on that, and it's about, you know, 75-85% women who were murdered, older, often widows, anybody who had it sounds like a joke, but it's not. Women who had a wart or a mole or a, you know, a bite or something like that. And so for 3 centuries, you know, there was a kind of a witch hunt in Europe, England, Scotland, where people who had cats, basically, people who had cats or had connection with nature, people who would talk like I'm talking now about birds, or, you know, the old wives' tales, people who listened and believed in old wives' tales, were murdered, hung often, or burned at the stake for being witches. And so there's a reason, probably deep-seated reason, why many people find it quite scary to talk about this innate wisdom, this silent knowledge that, you know, you look up at the moon and I can learn from the moon, and I listen and trust what I hear from the stars and the moon and even the sun sometimes. But it's very strong, that sun. And I think sometimes, you know, when I did the Camino de Santiago, that's an ancient pilgrimage. It's an ancient pilgrimage, and it's where kind of wisdom lives in the stones as you walk it. You know, it's a very powerful journey. But I think some of it was also coming to peace with the church, you know, with the Catholic Church, and the people in the church. Even though it wasn't just the church or the Catholic Church that was conducting this witch hunt, it was, you know, it was people who were looking to gain from getting rid of the older and weaker people in society. It was people who, you know, might have been looking to make some money from being a witch hunter, you know. And it's kind of dark and horrible part of our history. And very sad, very sad. And I think, you know, I think we need to heal from that. And I think, you know, I personally, I'm so glad to have come to a place of being able to know a lot of this stuff and embrace a lot of this stuff. And I think if you've got any questions about it, a really great book is called The Wisdom of the Shamans by Don Jose Ruiz. I love this book and I waited for it to come out. I was so excited, and I hope Don Jose won't be offended if I say, because I've been researching and studying and even having these really vivid dreams. So that when this book came out and I read it, I mean, it was really enjoyable and it's a great book. But it was kind of like I'd already read it because I'd had, I think I just, because I studied with Don Jose, I was feeling some strong connection. And so I was kind of really going, yeah, even to the last chapter. When got to the last chapter, and I was like, well, I already dreamt this last night. I dreamt what he was going to say the night before I read it. So, yeah, and this is the kind of thing that happens when we're connected, and it's a beautiful thing, and there's nothing. I call it being connected, really being connected, and we can listen to nature, and we can also listen to our ancestors, and that's a very beautiful thing. To be able to feel the presence of our ancestors and to honor them and to keep learning from their wisdom is a very beautiful thing. And I want to say this because it's not a disrespect to any culture, but no culture owns natural wisdom and our innate wisdom, and it's very what's the word, important that we don't judge people too quickly or think for example, very often we'll find that somebody's writing a book or working on something, and like the book with Don Jose, somebody else might have done some similar work or written some similar things, and it's just because we're all inspired at the same time by things. Luckily I wasn't writing that book, so that's really good because I would have been really annoyed if I had written all that and then somebody else had written it. But it's really about, sometimes we have this concept of ownership, and it's very interesting that, if we talk about remedies and healing and things like that, that people will try to lay claim to things. And it's really great that we do have a lot of traditional therapies and medicines that we can use. And it's great that in the UK there's been a discovery that I think it's dexamethasone, which is a very standard steroid, can be used to help people who are very sick with COVID-19. And it's basically quite a cheap drug that's available around the world, and that's great. But we have to ask, and this is one of the things that's happened where we see various countries suddenly think, oh, this is a solution or this is a medicine, and kind of bulk buy or block buy it. And we have to ask, what if somebody came up with a treatment and they said, oh, well, we own this, this company owns it, this country owns it. And we had to ask questions about that, about how much we share our wisdom and our knowledge. And I think that's one of the things is that I did a video quite a long time ago, beginning of lockdown, saying that we need to pay our healers and not expect them to work for free. And that includes people like, yoga instructors, fitness instructors, and those kind of people. But at the same time, as healers, I think it's very important, if we have something important to share and we can teach, that we must not be gouging, we must not be, and we see it very simply at this time with people who've gone out and who bought toilet paper, who bought hand sanitizer, and then tried to sell it at 10 times its market, the previous value. And we disrespect, we think that's terrible, isn't it? That's really terrible. So we just need to make sure that in our daily practice and the way that we're working with people, that we don't do that. And I'm looking around and seeing how other people are working and what I'm doing, and I have to decide, is that a good idea or is that a fair price, and those kind of things. And these are really good questions about our wisdom and our gifts and what we do with them and how we share them. And I just want to share one thing really about yoga. So, for some reason, this came up recently about Kundalini yoga, which is a beautiful type of yoga, and one that I really enjoyed for a while. Now, it's very yoga is an ancient practice that comes from India. Most of it comes from India, and there was a court case not that long ago when with Bikram yoga, which went over to the States, and they tried to copyright it and say, right, well, nobody else can do these moves. And the court in America threw it out and said, in the USA, said, no, you can't copyright a move of the human body. And it's a very, very confusing thing because, for example, I've done Kundalini yoga, but I'm not a teacher, and I can't say I'm a teacher unless I've gone and studied with that school of teachers, and I've done my years of practice. It's very interesting how we sort of study in something and we have to get, the certificate to say we can do this, and I have my Zumba instructor certificate and I do this, and it's quite interesting how we say yes, but we cannot copyright a move of the human body. And it's one of these questions that comes up in science. Can we copyright gravity? We can't copyright gravity because it's something. Just because we discover something doesn't mean to say that it belongs to us. And there's all these questions at the moment, like, are people going to mine the moon? People talk about mining the moon. It's like, well, who does the moon belong to? That seemed like a strange thing, So there's many, many questions that I have that we can have about ownership of things. And just, I hope, if nothing else, I've got you to ask some questions about cultural appropriation. And if you hear this expression, think twice, look at it. If you feel that maybe you are copying somebody without respect, let's think twice. Let's not do that. But at the same time, if you as a person in a culture is telling people that they are doing cultural appropriation, I don't really can't be bothered to work that out. They are appropriating things culturally. But if you accuse somebody of cultural appropriation, think twice. Think twice. Because I've absolutely loved studying with people around the world. I've absolutely loved studying African dance, cooking, different types of cooking. I absolutely loved, experiencing flamenco and all kinds of wonderful, wonderful rituals around the world. And there's something very blessed about that. I feel very blessed to have done that. And I very much honour those teachers, people who've taught me. And we have this wonderful richness of culture, and it's so important. But I don't want you to think that I don't respect culture, because, and I understand, we've been hurt. And in my book, I've written about how, there's so much wisdom in terms of, Hawaii and the traditions there and the rituals and things like that. And, I had the most amazing Lomi massage in London. And the lady who gave me this massage had been trained by a lady, and I think one of the elders in Hawaii. And it was the most incredible, and it was so powerful. It wasn't just the movements, it was also the energy and the ritual and everything. And I understand what true Lomi is. And yet I must have had so many massages where in the description it was sort of like, and a bit of Lomi, and a bit of Lomi is going to be in this. And, it's probably on 100 of bath products and spa products and things like that, where people have written something like that. And for me, that's not just cultural appropriation, that's kind of like a crime against the Trade Descriptions Act. Because when you've experienced something beautiful and true within a culture, it's a bit like, you know, going eating a food, and it's got nothing to do with the traditional dish. And another really good example of that is Shirodhara, which is a really powerful ritual massage practice, which is when you have oil poured on your third eye. And I've had this a couple of times. Incredible, absolutely, you know, transformative experience. I've had that in England and in Bangkok as well. And I would say the people who did that had been trained, properly trained. But I also had a Shirodhara in Croatia, and it had nothing to do with that practice at all. So again, it's really about being careful and thinking twice and checking the description. And you know, there's a lot. I mean, I wrote a 700-page book about 500 different types of practice, and you know, I'm trying to learn all about all these different practices and ways of being and culture. But I think it's also important. I absolutely understand why some people, some tribes keep their healing practices to themselves and keep it secret. And that's their choice. That's absolutely their choice. And I totally respect that. I absolutely respect that. And I was also very, very lucky one day to just happen upon an amazing ritual that was going on, and I really wanted to know what was going on, but I didn't ask. I just sat and witnessed that, and really I benefited from it in that I felt, you know, I felt that something was happening within me, and I believe that I was brought to that place for a reason, you know, that I just walked up when something really amazing was happening. But then I tried to find out what it was, and I wrote to people, I emailed people, and in the end, a lady, lovely lady, a librarian, she said, yes, you know, these things happen, but we're not going to talk to you about it because, you know, it's private. And I just absolutely respect that, absolutely understand why people want to keep things private, and that's, you know, that's fine. But it's, I don't want anybody who's like me feeling this connection, feeling the intuition and the need to know what on earth is going on, because it's so scary and confusing when you go through a kind of awakening and you awaken to your natural gifts. And I don't want anyone to feel that they're going crazy, because I know I did at times. And now I've come to understand that our perception is often more than 5 senses. You know, what we perceive, what we understand is much more than 5 senses. And it is, in our history, it was a wonderful, I might put a link to a wonderful lady who was talking about ancestry, and she was saying, you know, your DNA has all the stuff within it that we can access. But sometimes we also have a connection with people that we've never met before. And that's happened to me time and time again in my life, especially in the last few years, where I've so often met somebody and just started chatting to them. And the next thing I know, we're finding out things about each other that are just beyond belief. and when I wrote my books, I wrote these books about traveling, I left all the weirdest stuff out because I just thought no one's going to believe this. There are so many times where I have sat next to somebody on a train or bumped into somebody and while I was out walking, or you know, met somebody at a conference or something like that, and we started having conversation, and the next thing I know, I'm like, that's why I met you. Okay. And there's that drawing, of people together for a reason. And I think I want to call it magic. That there's a magic in the space between, a magic that draws us to the right things and the right people. And the biggest magic is listening to your heart, is really listening and trusting your intuition. And that's why it's so scary, because it takes us to these wonderful places, and it allows us to let go of ego and just be true and be authentic, be true to who we are. And it can be very scary if you've been brought up in a culture that disrespects and disregards ancient wisdom. I mean, I was sitting here thinking, can you imagine if, if you think about in England, our leaders are constantly disrespecting and ignoring the scientific advice that they're being given. So we constantly hear, like, all the scientists are saying, no, don't do this. And the leaders are going, yes, we're going to do it. Can you imagine if you also had like a panel of intuitives? So we kind of like a little panel of people who just think, I've got a feeling about this. I've got a gut feeling that we should do this or we should do that, And the government, like, would they listen to them? Or would they just go, nah, we're just going to do what we want? Yeah, I think it's down to us personally to trust our instinct. And, it's kind of such a strange thing, because when I go to some countries and I talk to some people, we know this stuff and it's just so natural and it's just so obvious. And then I find myself talking to other people and I just see this look of like, you complete nutter. You must be a complete nutter if you believe this. And it's funny because obviously, it's great for me to laugh about it because I'm past that time when it was such a conflict for me and it was so hard. And for me, what happened was really that I just got to a place of, if I didn't go and I didn't like follow my heart and follow my path, I just couldn't stay where I was anymore. I just couldn't stay in that place of just feeling so conflicted and confused and overwhelmed. And I needed to just go with it and see what happened. And now it's just normal. It's just, it's not a big deal. It's just natural. It's all just natural. So I hope that helps. And I hope if you're feeling weird about this stuff, I think I did another one about ancient wisdom as well. And I hope that helps as well. And just, sometimes we think too much with our heads and not enough with our hearts. And that's actually the Sufi way as well, is to listen, to see with your heart, to look with your heart. And I've had some lovely Sufi experiences. And again, another beautiful, beautiful tradition. So anyway, thank you so much, and I hope it helps. And please just, if you remember one thing, remember that you are perfect. You are absolutely perfect. And even though it feels confusing at times, if you have a natural gift, and if you are aware of that sensitivity and being able to perceive things that are not your five senses, I hope you come to a place of appreciating that gift sooner rather than later, and you don't suffer too much in that transition and in that journey to really being able to be truly authentic and honest with yourself. Okay? Lots of love. Bye.